What is a dark secret that you have? For 3 years, I maintained the illusion of student life with the precision of a master illusionist, returning home during holidays to perpetuate the charade, my stories of academic achievement and European exploration becoming more elaborate with each telling. When graduation time approached like a looming storm cloud, I fabricated a brilliant IT degree, painting myself as the first in my family to achieve such academic heights, or so they believed, their pride in my accomplishments a knife twisting in my gut. The deception didn't end there, but grew like a snowball rolling downhill, gathering mass and momentum. I boldly included the fictional degree on my CV, a foundation of sand upon which I would build my career. I relied on my natural aptitude and the knowledge gleaned from my brief university experience to navigate job interviews, my confidence a mask that never slipped. Armed with industry buzzwords that I had studied like lines in a play and an unwavering belief in my performance, I convinced employers of my expertise. No one ever questioned the authenticity of my credentials, each successful deception both a victory and a deeper wound to my conscience. For 5 years, I climbed the corporate ladder like a skilled acrobat on an invisible tightrope, learning everything I needed on the job with the desperate intensity of someone who knows they can't afford to fail. My actual competence grew until it nearly matched my fictional credentials, and I had enough real experience to quietly remove the fabricated degree from my resume, like erasing the scaffolding once a building can stand on its own. Looking back now, from the vantage point of years and hard-earned wisdom, I'm both amazed by my audacity and haunted by the possibility of discovery, like a shadow that never quite leaves my peripheral vision. I sometimes wonder, in those quiet moments when doubt creeps in like fog, how many others walk similar paths of deception, their careers built on foundations of carefully crafted lies, each success both a triumph and a reminder of the truth they keep buried. Story 13. This is a love story wrapped in secrecy and sacrifice, a tale I've never shared publicly before, its edges still sharp with both tenderness and pain. I married my ex-boyfriend as he was dying, not out of desperate romance, but to prevent his parents from inheriting his legacy. Our story began in school, where he trusted me with his truth, his hidden sexuality, in a moment of raw vulnerability that would forever bind our hearts together. I responded with my own confession of bisexuality and feelings for him, our shared secrets becoming the foundation of a relationship that defied conventional understanding. We became more than just a couple. We were each other's safe harbor in a world that seemed determined to deny our truths, our connection deepening like roots seeking water in parched earth. But like many teenage romances, distance and time zones conspired against us when his family moved to South Korea, our love story pausing mid-chapter. We ended things amicably, our hearts heavy but accepting, believing our chapter had closed with a gentle finality. A decade later, fate orchestrated an unexpected reunion that felt like a scene from a dream. Fresh from university and working in finance, I encountered him at a local bar, his presence stopping time itself. At first, I thought he was a ghost, a trick of memory and light playing with my mind. Late puberty had transformed me so completely that he didn't recognize me at first, my former self buried beneath years of change. When realization finally dawned, we fell into an embrace that bridged the years between us like a bridge spanning an impossible chasm, sharing a kiss that needed no words to express the depth of our reconnection. That night, he unfolded the story of his life after Korea like pages from a painful diary, coming out to his parents, facing their complete rejection that cut like winter wind, their relentless attempts to force him into arranged marriages with women, and his eventual escape from their suffocating control. Though I wasn't ready for a relationship, having just emerged from the wreckage of my own failed romance, I offered him shelter while he rebuilt his life from the ashes of his family's rejection. Months passed like water through our fingers, and he seemed to find his footing, securing a job and his own place, his life taking shape like clay on a potter's wheel. Then came the night that changed everything, a frantic call that shattered the peace, the horrifying sound of him vomiting blood, the desperate rush to the hospital that felt like racing against death itself. Weeks of tests revealed the cruel truth that would rewrite our story once again. Stomach cancer, an unwelcome villain in our tale of redemption. I stayed by his side through every treatment, every scan, every brutal round of chemotherapy that failed to halt the disease's relentless march through his body. His parents, aware of his diagnosis, wielded it like a weapon, their cruel words blaming his sexuality for his illness, as if hatred could manifest as disease. In defiance of their cruelty, and to ensure they wouldn't benefit from his death, we married at the courthouse a week later, two strangers serving as witnesses as we held hands and made promises we knew would be brief but meaningful. For 5 precious months, we lived as husbands, each day a gift wrapped in both joy and sorrow. I tried to give him all the experiences he'd missed, proper dates that felt like stolen moments from a different life, proudly introducing him as my husband at my company Christmas party, simply being together in the quiet moments between waves of pain. When the end came, It was peaceful, a gentle exhale into the night. I held his hand through those final hours, feeling each breath become more precious than the last, knowing each could be the finale to our story. In the morning's harsh light, I wrote to everyone he knew, sharing the news of his passing with words that felt inadequate to capture our loss. At the funeral, his parents arrived unaware of our marriage, their ignorance a final twist in our tale. When I was called to speak as his husband, their fury erupted like a volcano, spewing years of buried hatred. At the reception, they confronted me with curses and threats that bounced off the armor of my grief. But my father and brother became unexpected guardians, removing them from the scene like angels banishing demons. 3 years have passed, each one a step further from those final days, and I've only recently begun to consider dating again, knowing in my heart it's what he would have wanted for me. Even now, I carry the memories of those final months like precious stones in my pocket, their weight both comforting and heavy. Despite the pain that colored our ending, being there for him, loving him openly and without shame in his final days, was the greatest privilege of my life, a secret chapter in a love story that defied convention until the very end. Story 14. Happiness has become a stranger to me, its absence so complete that I've forgotten its touch, like a color I once knew but can no longer name. I guard this truth carefully, wrapping myself in silence during conversations about personal matters, my words becoming smoke that dissipates before revealing too much, choosing to remain a shadow at the edges of social interaction, a ghost haunting the periphery of other people's joy. But the reality is that I exist in a void of perpetual darkness, even when surrounded by the warmth of others, their light unable to penetrate the dense fog of my isolation. There was a time, now seeming like a distant dream, when joy wasn't just a memory, when love filled my days with vibrant colors and boundless purpose, when opportunities sparkled with promise on the horizon like stars in a clear night sky. But I allowed my inner demons to devour it all, piece by precious piece, my own chaos becoming the architect of my destruction, building walls of isolation with the precision of a master craftsman. Since then, each day has become an exercise in mere survival, a mechanical process of existing rather than living, like a clock ticking away moments without meaning. I used to mock those movie scenes where someone falls apart after losing their great love, those carefully choreographed montages of takeout containers piling up while the protagonist spirals into depression, only to find magical resolution by the final act, as if heartbreak could be cured by the simple passage of time. Real life, I've learned with brutal clarity, writes a far crueler script. Love isn't just an emotion that can be packed away in boxes. It's an organ you carry inside yourself, vital and irreplaceable, and when it's torn away, there's no quick healing, no simple sutures to close the wound that bleeds memories instead of blood. I still feel her presence like phantom limbs that refuse to acknowledge their loss, the ghost of her legs brushing against mine as we settled into the couch on lazy Sunday afternoons, the memory of her skin scent lingering in the air like a haunting perfume that only I can detect. If someone offered me a choice between reliving one day of that happiness or taking $1,000, I'd choose her without hesitation, every time, even knowing the pain that would follow, because any moment of real feeling would be worth more than all the empty days that have followed. Now there is no happiness, only an endless parade of distractions, temporary diversions from an overwhelming sense of loss that threatens to swallow me whole. If there's any lesson to be found in this wasteland of emotion, it's a warning written in the scars of experience. Don't surrender what's precious. Don't let insecurities and self-doubt destroy something worth preserving. Some losses can't be undone, some wounds never truly heal, leaving us to carry their weight like invisible chains that grow heavier with each passing day. Story 15. In high school, I encountered evil wearing the mask of help. Our school counselor, a woman whose negligence would cast long shadows over countless young lives, her dismissive attitude a weapon that cut deeper than any physical blade. She was notorious for wielding phrases like, "That's not bad enough to get anyone involved." And other people have it worse, like poisoned arrows, each one striking vulnerable souls who had gathered the courage to seek aid, only to find their pain diminished and dismissed. A small group of us, united by our shared experiences of her callousness, found solace in each other's company, our collective pain forming an invisible bond that helped us survive her systematic betrayal of trust. We became guardians of each other's stories, witnesses to the damage she inflicted with her calculated indifference, each of us carrying scars that her words had carved into our spirits. But the true horror of her negligence revealed itself like a nightmare unfolding in slow motion when a sophomore girl, after months of desperate pleas for help, disclosed that she was being physically and sexually abused by her parents. Her voice trembled with the weight of her truth, each word a testament to the courage it took to speak out, to reach for help one final time despite having been turned away so many times before. The counselor's response? The same wall of indifference she'd built against all our pain, as impenetrable as a fortress built from years of practiced apathy. Driven to desperation, With nowhere else to turn and no one else to trust, the girl took matters into her own hands, going directly to the police with the raw evidence of her suffering. A rape kit and the constellation of bruises mapping her body confirmed the nightmare she'd been living, leading to her parents' arrest and a chain of events that would finally expose the counselor's failures. The news reached the school board before the press could break the story, like thunder preceding a storm. The counselor resigned in disgrace, the principal following suit under the guise of needing time to reevaluate her position in education. But her departure came too late for too many of us. The toll of her failure echoes through the years like a haunting melody. Too many of my classmates lost to drugs or their own hands, their cries for help dismissed until silence became permanent, their potential extinguished by the very person who should have been their beacon of hope. While there's a bitter satisfaction in knowing she no longer holds power over young lives, the comfort is hollow, like ashes in the mouth. For so many of us, her failure to act came too late to make a difference, the damage already done, the wounds already too deep to heal completely. All I can do now is hope that her replacement listens, that small hope becoming a lifeline in the face of such systemic betrayal, a tiny flame of possibility that future students might find the help we were denied. Story 16. I carry a secret that weighs on my conscience like a stone, growing heavier with each passing year. The knowledge of my father's infidelity, a truth I've guarded since I was 15. The discovery came by accident, a chance encounter that shattered my image of our perfect family like a mirror dropping to concrete, each shard reflecting a different facet of betrayal. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day that shouldn't hold life-altering revelations. I was walking home from school, taking my usual shortcut through the park, when I saw them, my father and a woman I didn't recognize, sharing an intimate moment that left no room for innocent interpretation. They were partially hidden behind a cluster of oak trees, but there was no mistaking his familiar silhouette, the way he held her, the tender gestures that should have been reserved for my mother alone. The scene burned itself into my memory like a brand, every detail preserved with cruel clarity. The woman's red coat bright against the autumn leaves, my father's wedding ring catching the afternoon light as his hand caressed her face, their shared laughter carrying on the wind. I stood frozen, my school bag suddenly heavy as lead, my heart thundering in my chest as I tried to process what I was witnessing. I never confronted him about it. How could I? The weight of this knowledge became my constant companion, a shadow that followed me through family dinners where I could barely meet his eyes, through holidays where every smile felt like a lie, through countless moments when I wanted to scream the truth but swallowed it instead, letting it settle like poison in my gut. The hardest part isn't keeping the secret. It's watching my mother, blissfully unaware, continue to love and trust him completely. She speaks of him with such pride and affection, each word of praise like a knife twisting in my heart. Sometimes I catch him looking at her with genuine love, and I'm torn between rage at his duplicity and a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, what I saw that day was a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment rather than an ongoing betrayal. Years have passed, and I've grown into adulthood carrying this burden. The woman in the red coat is long gone, but the memory of that day remains vivid, a wound that refuses to heal. Sometimes I wonder if my silence makes me complicit in his deception, if my choice to protect our family's peace comes at too high a cost to my own conscience. But then I look at my mother's happy face, at the life she's built with such love and trust, and I know I'll keep this secret until it turns to ashes in my mouth. Story 17. For 2 years, I lived a life woven from lies, each falsehood building upon the last like a house of cards that I knew would eventually collapse. The deception began simply enough. A small lie to my parents about attending college, a fabricated story about a part-time job that didn't exist. But lies, I learned, are living things that grow and multiply, demanding ever more elaborate tales to maintain their existence. Every morning, I'd leave the house dressed for success, briefcase in hand, playing the role of the dedicated student and hard-working employee. In reality, I spent my days wandering the city like a ghost, haunting libraries and coffee shops, crafting detailed stories about classes I never attended and co-workers who existed only in my imagination. The weight of these deceptions pressed against my chest like a physical presence, making it harder to breathe with each passing day. The facade I'd built required constant maintenance. Fake report cards created with painstaking attention to detail, manufactured work stories complete with fictional office politics and imaginary deadlines. I became an architect of illusion, constructing an alternate reality, so convincing that sometimes I almost believed it myself. But beneath the surface, depression was taking root, feeding on the guilt and shame that had become my constant companions. My parents' pride in their hardworking child was like acid eating away at my soul. Every proud smile, every encouraging word drove the knife of guilt deeper. They sacrificed so much to support my education, pinching pennies to help with tuition that was never paid, celebrating achievements that existed only in my carefully crafted lies. Their unconditional love made my betrayal all the more bitter, a poison I willingly drank each day. The breaking point came not with a dramatic revelation, but with a quiet realization. I was losing myself in the labyrinth of lies I'd created. The person I pretended to be was becoming more real than who I actually was, and the thought terrified me more than the prospect of being discovered. One evening, sitting at the dinner table listening to my mother talk about my fictional future graduation, something inside me simply cracked. The truth spilled out of me like a dam breaking, years of deception washing away in a flood of tears and confessions. I expected anger, disappointment, perhaps even disownment. What I received instead was something far more difficult to bear: understanding. My parents, through their hurt and shock, saw not the web of lies I'd spun, but the pain that had driven me to spin it. The aftermath was both better and worse than I'd imagined. The relief of unburdening myself was immense, but facing the reality of my actions, the wasted time, the squandered opportunities, the betrayed trust, was like walking through fire. Depression, no longer hidden behind elaborate deceptions, emerged fully into the light, demanding to be acknowledged and addressed. Recovery was a slow process, marked by therapy sessions, honest conversations, and the gradual rebuilding of trust. My parents' support, though I felt I deserved none of it, became the foundation upon which I began to reconstruct my life, this time with truth as its cornerstone. The experience taught me that while lies might seem like an escape, they're really just another form of prison, one we build ourselves, brick by brick, until we can no longer see the sky. Story 18. My childhood was shaped by the shadow of my father's addiction, a darkness that crept into every corner of our lives like toxic smoke. He wasn't always the monster that heroin made him. There were moments, brief glimpses of the man he could have been, shining through the haze of his dependency like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. But those moments were rare and fleeting, quickly swallowed by the insatiable hunger of his addiction. The memories of those years are a kaleidoscope of chaos and fear, each turn revealing a new facet of our broken family life. I remember the way my mother's hands would shake as she counted the money hidden in her sock drawer, the quiet desperation in her eyes when she discovered it missing. I can still hear the sound of my father's keys in the door at 3 a.m., the way my heart would race, wondering if he'd be the loving father I craved or the stranger heroin had created. Our house became a fortress of secrets, each room holding its own dark stories. The bathroom, where I'd find him slumped against the wall, needles still dangling from his arm, his skin the color of old paper. The kitchen, where my mother would sit alone at midnight, crying silently into her coffee, thinking no one could hear. My bedroom, where I learned to sleep with one eye open, always alert for the sounds of chaos that could erupt at any moment. The worst part wasn't the addiction itself, it was watching my mother slowly break under the weight of it all. She was like a flower wilting in darkness, her vibrant spirit dimming day by day as she struggled to hold our family together. She worked 3 jobs, her hands growing calloused and worn, while my father drained our resources like a vampire feeding on blood. Her love for him was both her strength and her curse, keeping her tethered to a man who had become a black hole of need and desperation. School became my sanctuary, a place where I could pretend to be normal, where the weight of my father's addiction couldn't reach me. I excelled in my studies, not out of any particular brilliance, but from a desperate need to create something pure and untainted in my life. My teachers praised my dedication, unaware that each perfect grade was a lifeline, a way to prove that I wasn't defined by the chaos at home. The secret I carry isn't just about my father's addiction. It's about the person it forced me to become. I learned to lie with a smile, to create elaborate stories about why my father never attended school events, why we couldn't have friends over, why we sometimes had no electricity. I became a master of deflection, an artist of evasion, skills that have followed me into adulthood like unwanted shadows. Years later, long after I'd escaped that house of shadows, I received news of my father's overdose. He survived, barely, but the incident forced me to confront the complex tangle of emotions I'd buried deep inside. The relief I felt at the possibility of his death haunts me still. What kind of daughter feels relief at the thought of losing their father? But addiction doesn't just destroy the addict. It corrupts everything it touches, twisting love into something unrecognizable. Today, I work with children of addicts, using my experience to help them navigate their own storms. It's my way of finding meaning in the darkness of my childhood, of turning poison into medicine. But late at night, when the memories creep in like unwelcome guests, I still feel the weight of those years pressing down on me, a reminder that some scars never fully heal. They just become part of who we are. Story 19. Love, I've learned, sometimes means carrying burdens alone, shielding those we care about from the weight of worry and fear. My partner, with their tender heart and endless capacity for concern, doesn't know about the silent battles I waged to maintain our peaceful existence. They don't know about the mysterious lump I discovered months ago, the way my heart races with each doctor's appointment, the sleepless nights spent wondering if this could be something serious. I've become an expert at hiding my health anxieties behind a facade of normalcy, masking my concerns with practiced smiles and casual deflections. When they ask about my day, I carefully edit out the hours spent in medical waiting rooms, the consultations that leave me with more questions than answers, the prescriptions I fill in secret. It's a delicate dance of omission, each step carefully calculated to protect them from unnecessary worry. The house, too, holds its share of secrets. They don't know about the slow leak in the basement that I discovered last winter, the one I've been managing with a complex system of buckets and temporary fixes. Every morning, before they wake, I check the water level, empty the containers, and maintain the illusion that everything is fine. The repair costs would strain our budget, and I can't bear to add financial stress to their already full plate. Sometimes the weight of these secrets feels like a physical presence, pressing down on my chest as we lie together in bed. They'll stroke my hair, tell me about their dreams and fears, while I swallow my own concerns like bitter pills. The guilt of these deceptions mingles with my determination to protect them, creating a cocktail of emotions that I've learned to drink in silence. The irony doesn't escape me, that in trying to protect them from worry, I've created a web of secrets that would probably worry them more if they knew. But I've watched them struggle with anxiety before, seen how it can consume them, turn their nights sleepless and their days gray with concern. My health issues, the house problems, these are my burdens to bear, my way of loving them through protection rather than complete honesty. Last week, as I sat in another doctor's waiting room, clutching test results that thankfully showed nothing serious, I almost broke down and called them. The relief was overwhelming, and I wanted to share it, to let them hold me and celebrate this good news. But how could I explain the relief without revealing the fear that preceded it? How could I share the victory without admitting to the battle? So I added this moment to my collection of secrets, filed it away with the others, the midnight repairs, the hidden medical bills, the silent prayers for good test results. Sometimes I wonder if this is really love or just another form of deception, if protecting them from worry is worth the distance these secrets create between us. But then I see their peaceful smile, hear their untroubled laughter, and I know I'll continue to carry these burdens alone, a silent guardian of their peace of mind. Story 1. Last year, I found myself locked in a desperate battle for survival against COVID-19, my world shrinking to the suffocating confines of a hospital room. The sterile walls became my prison as I lay tethered to a ventilator for 3 excruciating weeks, my consciousness repeatedly dragged into and out of a medically induced coma as death's icy fingers reached for me again and again. But here's my darkest confession, one that still makes me shudder. I welcomed death's cold embrace with open arms. At the time, I was drowning in the wreckage of a marriage shattered beyond repair, wrestling with the suffocating tentacles of severe depression that threatened to pull me under completely. My world hadn't just crumbled. It had imploded with the force of a collapsing star, leaving nothing but an endless void where my future used to shine. In a twisted way that still haunts my thoughts, I felt an almost perverse relief that a microscopic virus might accomplish what I couldn't bring myself to do, end my existence. I didn't just accept death. I yearned for it with a desperate hunger, lacking even the faintest whisper of will to fight against its seductive pull. Everything changed during one fateful night in my coma-induced limbo, where reality and dreams blurred into a hazy twilight. The doctors, their voices heavy with the weight of grim certainty, didn't expect me to survive until dawn's first light. In a rare act of compassion that broke through the rigid barriers of COVID protocols, they allowed my family to say their final goodbyes. My mother, my eternal anchor, my unwavering rock, who had weathered the relentless storms of single parenthood to raise me, entered my room like an angel stepping through the gates of hell. Through the thick fog of unconsciousness that clouded my mind, her voice pierced the darkness like a beacon of hope cutting through a storm-ravaged night. Her words, drenched in both fierce love and raw desperation, called me back from the brink. "You're a fighter, my precious child. Please keep fighting. I need you here with me more than you could ever know." That moment became my resurrection point, a pivot between darkness and light. Her voice, trembling with both unshakable strength and heart-wrenching vulnerability, ignited a spark in my extinguished spirit that slowly grew into a flame. From that night forward, my condition began to improve, defying every grim medical expectation. The journey to recovery was excruciating. Every breath felt like inhaling broken glass, every movement a battle against my own rebellious body, and I'm still walking that challenging path today. But I know with bone-deep certainty that without that moment, without my mother's voice slicing through the suffocating darkness like a sword of light, I would have willingly slipped away into the eternal night. I've told my mother how her presence that night became my lifeline, my tether to the world of the living, but I've never confessed how ready, how desperately eager, I was to surrender to death's seductive embrace. If the hospital hadn't bent their rigid COVID protocols, if they hadn't allowed her into my room that night, I truly believe I would have willingly let go, choosing the seductive peace of oblivion over the chaotic agony of living. That truth remains lodged in my heart like a splinter of ice, a reminder of how close I came to choosing darkness over light. Story 2. One night, my childhood best friend materialized in my college dorm doorway like a ghost stepping out of my past, the fluorescent hallway lights casting strange shadows across his once familiar face. His presence carried an unsettling edge that made my skin crawl. Something dark and dangerous lurking behind his easy smile as he effortlessly charmed his way through deals for cocaine and pills with the residents on my floor. I watched, both mesmerized and horrified, as this twisted version of my friend, this stranger wearing his skin, navigated the treacherous waters of drug transactions with an almost theatrical confidence that seemed to mock our innocent shared childhood. Before dissolving back into the night like a phantom, he left me with words that would haunt my dreams forever. "Don't tell my mother what I'm doing, but if something happens," here his voice cracked, a brief glimpse of the boy I once knew breaking through the facade. "Tell her I love her." The weight of those words hung in the air like an executioner's axe, but I dismissed them as dark humor, a dramatic flourish from someone I foolishly thought I still understood. We had plans to meet the next day, so I let him walk away into the darkness, clinging to the naive belief that tomorrow would surely come. But tomorrow brought only tragedy, served with a side of bitter regret. He crashed his car that night, his body found twisted in the wreckage. No seatbelt to restrain him as his blood sang with the chemical chorus that had given him false courage. He didn't survive the impact, his life snuffed out on a lonely stretch of highway. When his mother's tear-stained face searched mine for answers about what happened to her precious boy, I chose to become the keeper of his final secret, the guardian of his darker truth. I couldn't bear to taint her grief with the knowledge of his descent into darkness, preferring to let her believe it was simply a tragic accident, a cruel twist of fate, rather than the inevitable conclusion to a path he had chosen. To this day, I guard this truth like a poisoned chalice, its toxic contents eating away at my conscience. The guilt of ignoring the warning signs that night mingles with my unwavering conviction to protect his mother from an even more devastating reality. Some truths, I've learned through years of carrying this burden, are better left buried with the dead, even if they haunt the living. Story 3. Years ago, as a teenager desperately trying to keep my family's head above the rising waters of poverty, I found myself entangled in a web of necessity and deception at a local grocery store. We came from the kind of poverty that gnaws at your dignity one missed meal at a time, where every purchase was a careful calculation and school lunches were the only reliable sustenance in our daily struggle. I took a summer job with dreams of easing my mother's burden, her tired eyes and worn hands a constant reminder of our precarious existence. We inhabited that cruel gray area of American poverty, making just enough to be denied government assistance, but nowhere near enough to escape the constant fear of hunger. The store manager, a man whose very presence seemed to feed on others' desperation like a vulture circling wounded prey, fired me after just 2 weeks. His words, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone crushing an insect, still echo in my ears. "I just don't like your personality." It was our first and only interaction, a brief exchange that would alter the course of my summer. When I broke down, explaining through desperate tears how my mother was counting on me to help buy groceries, he dismissed my distress with a wave of his manicured hand, as if my family's hunger was nothing more than teenage dramatics. That day, fate, or perhaps divine intervention, left a roll of marked-down stickers in my pocket, innocent squares of paper that would become my tools of survival. A plan crystallized in my mind like frost on a winter window, born from the icy grip of desperation and nurtured by the fierce need to protect my family. With meticulous attention to detail that belied my years, I copied these stickers onto sticky paper, creating my own arsenal of hope disguised as discount tags. Throughout that sweltering summer, I orchestrated an intricate dance of deception, transforming thousands of dollars worth of groceries into affordable sustenance through my counterfeit markdowns. Premium cuts of salmon that would have cost a day's wages became accessible dreams. Succulent racks of ribs found their way to our table for mere dollars, and artisanal cheeses that normally mocked us from behind glass cases made their way into our kitchen. I became a master of discretion, spreading my purchases across multiple stores like a spy covering their tracks, never raising suspicion with excessive purchases at any single location. For my mother, I wove a story about an academic scholarship, a fiction to explain our sudden ability to afford quality food. She never questioned this miracle, perhaps too relieved by the respite from constant want to look too closely at our good fortune. The statute of limitations has long since expired on my teenage crime, and I carry no guilt for my actions. In my heart, I know I did what was necessary to help my family survive, transforming those stolen markdown stickers into lifelines in a world that had shown us little mercy. Sometimes survival requires bending the rules that were never designed to protect people like us in the first place. Story 4. When I was 13, standing precariously on the razor's edge between childhood innocence and the harsh realities of adolescence, I joined the Explorers program, an offshoot of the Boy Scouts that worked alongside the local sheriff's department. We were junior officers in training, our young minds filled with dreams of justice and service as we learned the ways of law enforcement through shooting ranges that echoed with gunfire, ride-alongs that made our hearts race with excitement, and the weight of mock uniforms that made us feel invincible, complete with handcuffs that jingled at our hips and crackling radios that connected us to a world of adult authority. The annual weekend retreat at a National Guard base should have been the pinnacle of our training, a rite of passage shared with hundreds of other bright-eyed young aspiring officers from across the state. Instead, it became the setting for a nightmare that would carve itself into my psyche, haunting me for decades to come. In the barracks, where rows of identical single beds stretched like tombstones in the dim light, housing 30 kids per room, my small stature, barely 4 feet 8 inches and still waiting for puberty's transformative touch, marked me as prey in a jungle of adolescent predators. What began as typical harassment from a group of older boys, their faces now mercifully blurred by time, escalated into a horror that my young mind couldn't comprehend. They surrounded me like wolves circling a wounded fawn, their numbers growing as if drawn by some primal scent of vulnerability. Strong hands that had no right to touch me pinned me down with brutal efficiency, dragged me to a bed that became my prison, the cold metal of handcuffs, tools meant to represent justice, biting into my wrists like serpent's fangs despite my desperate struggles. I fought with every ounce of strength in my small body, biting until I tasted blood, clawing until my nails bent, kicking against the inevitable with the fury of a cornered animal. The oldest boy, his face twisted with a power-drunk cruelty that still visits my nightmares, took charge of my torment like a conductor leading a symphony of violence. They attempted to violate me with a broomstick. Here my memory mercifully fragments, the details blurring like a painting left out in the rain, though I don't believe they succeeded in their darkest intentions. No hero emerged from the shadows to save me. Perhaps they grew bored with their sport, or someone's approaching footsteps interrupted their game. But eventually the assault ended as suddenly as it had begun. Minutes later, everyone prepared for the next scheduled activity as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just tried to shatter a child's soul into irreparable pieces. I buried this secret in the deepest vault of my being, never breathing a word to the officers who should have protected me, the parents who would have been devastated, or even the wife who shares my bed. It rarely surfaces in my conscious thoughts, like a creature dwelling in the darkest depths of an ocean. Yet as I write these words, I feel the flood of emotions breaking through decades of carefully constructed dams, threatening to drown me in remembered terror. This is my first confession, my first acknowledgement of a wound that never truly healed, a scar that still throbs with phantom pain whenever I see a uniform or hear the rattle of handcuffs. Story 5. I once crafted an elaborate 2-year exit strategy from life itself, a meticulously choreographed dance of disconnection designed with the precision of a master watchmaker to make my departure from this world as seamless as morning dew evaporating in sunlight. The plan was elegantly simple in its calculated brutality. Gradually sever every tie that anchored me to existence, like a spider methodically cutting the strands of its own web, relocate to another state where anonymity would be my shroud, and wait in self-imposed solitude until the threads of memory and connection frayed to nothing more than whispers in the wind. Once I felt certain I'd been erased from the minds of those who once knew me, I would take my final bow from life's stage. My goal wasn't to be mourned or missed. I wanted people to think good riddance, and move on without so much as a backward glance, like pedestrians stepping over a fallen leaf. But I hadn't accounted for my mother's relentless love, a force as persistent as the tide and as unshakable as mountains. She became my unwitting anchor to life, her daily calls piercing through my carefully constructed walls like arrows of light through darkness, her monthly drives of several hours to visit me becoming pilgrimages of preservation. Each conversation would end with the same powerful mantra, words that struck my armored heart like a battering ram. Remember, I need you around and will always love you. Her words were arrows that found their mark in my carefully fortified heart, each hit weakening my resolve to leave this world behind. Then my best friend joined her siege against my isolation, launching a relentless campaign of voicemails that bombarded my defenses until, out of sheer annoyance more than anything else, I finally answered his call. His first words cut through my carefully constructed walls like a hot knife through butter. "Finally, you asshole. Let's catch up." The casual profanity, the familiar irritation in his voice, somehow reached past all my barriers. From that day forward, his weekly calls became another thread pulling me back from the abyss, each conversation a rope thrown to a drowning man. The final blow to my exit strategy came in the form of a small, furry infiltrator, a kitten my mother brought me, claiming with innocent deception that it would be good for me. She had conspired with my therapist and psychiatrist, who had suggested an emotional support animal as a last-ditch effort to anchor me to life. That cat, with its innocent eyes and persistent affection, rewrote my story in ways I never could have predicted. like an author taking control of a narrative that had been spiraling towards tragedy. One night, in the depths of my despair, I hit rock bottom like a diver touching the darkest depths of an ocean trench. I sat at my desk, the lamp casting shadows that seemed to dance with malicious glee as I poured my heart into final letters, each word an apology and a goodbye, each sentence another nail in my own coffin. But when I tried to write my mother's letter, something deep inside me shattered like a glass dropped on concrete. The thought of leaving my cat behind, this innocent creature who had made me its entire world, unleashed a flood of tears I couldn't contain, as if some ancient dam within my soul had finally crumbled under the weight of too much pain. I cried until exhaustion claimed me like a merciful anesthetic, slumping over my desk in defeat, tear-stained paper stuck to my cheek. I woke to gentle paw taps and hungry chirps, my cat performing its daily ritual of breakfast demands, its whiskers tickling my face like strands of hope. That simple moment of normalcy, that pure expression of life continuing despite my dark plans, pulled me back from the edge like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. I never completed my exit strategy after that night, and that cat, with its unconditional love and persistent presence, became my reason to stay, my furry guardian angel in a world that suddenly seemed less dark. Today, he's still by my side, a constant reminder of how the smallest things can save the biggest lives. I've become that grown man who will drop everything to pet a cat, because to me, they're not just pets. They're little angels in fur coats, sent to Earth to remind us that life, even at its darkest, contains moments worth staying for. Only my wife, mother, and therapist know this story, this confession of how close I came to becoming another statistic. It's my darkest secret, my most vulnerable memory, a testament to how the smallest things, a mother's relentless love, a friend's stubborn persistence, a cat's unconditional affection, can become the anchors that hold us to life when we're determined to let go. Sometimes survival doesn't require grand gestures or dramatic interventions. Sometimes it's as simple as a cat demanding breakfast at dawn, reminding us that tomorrow might be worth seeing after all. Story 6. When I was 5 or 6, an age when the world should have been painted in the bright colors of innocence and wonder, I witnessed something that would forever stain my understanding of what parents were capable of inflicting on their own flesh and blood. My mother had a friend whose 2 children seemed to dance perpetually on the knife edge of chaos. Their wild, untamed behavior a living reflection of their mother's negligent parenting, like fractured mirrors showing distorted images of childhood. During one particularly fateful visit to their house, where the air always seemed thick with unspoken tensions, the children's usual defiance took an unexpected and disturbing turn. Their game, which started innocently enough, devolved into a frenzied display of nakedness that left my young mind both mortified and confused, stirring feelings and questions I was far too young to process or understand. But what followed would etch itself into my memory with the permanence of acid on metal. Their mother discovered them, her face transforming from its usual mask of indifference into something monstrous, a visage of pure rage that seemed to distort her features into something barely human. With the swift violence of a striking snake, she dragged her older child, still naked and vulnerable as a newborn, into the bathroom. The door slammed shut with the finality of a coffin lid, but it couldn't muffle the sounds that followed. The sharp, sickening crack of flesh meeting flesh, the heart-wrenching screams that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house, the broken sobs that echoed through the walls like the cries of a wounded animal. When the child emerged from that makeshift torture chamber, their body bore the violent evidence of their mother's uncontrolled fury, bruises blooming like dark, poisonous flowers across their pale skin, one eye already swelling shut like a dying star. They quietly dressed themselves with the mechanical movements of someone well-practiced in hiding their pain, and life continued its grotesque parade as if nothing had happened. But something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of the world. That moment became a permanent fixture in my earliest memories, a dark stain on the canvas of my childhood, teaching me the cruel lesson that those meant to protect us could become our greatest tormentors, that love and violence could exist in the same heart, in the same hands. Story 7. I come from a family so vast and sprawling that even now, at 44, there are relatives whose faces I wouldn't recognize if we passed on the street, their features as foreign to me as strangers in a crowded marketplace. This expansive family tree, with its countless branches intertwining through generations of marriages, reunions, and shared histories, would become the unlikely backdrop for a love story that defied conventional morality and eventually led to both heartbreak and healing. In the vibrant, neon-tinged landscape of the early 90s, I lived the quintessential teenage life until fate intervened at swim practice. There she was, cutting through the water with the grace of a mermaid, her presence electric enough to make the chlorine-scented air crackle with possibility. Our connection was instant and magnetic, as if some cosmic force had aligned just to bring us together. Each day spent together deepened our bond, our love growing as naturally as flowers reaching toward the sun. When she became pregnant with twins in our senior year, Our joy was pure and uncomplicated, a rainbow stretching across our shared sky, promising a future bright with possibilities. But in the 8th month, as we stood on the precipice of parenthood, a revelation crashed into our world like a meteor, leaving nothing unchanged in its wake. The truth emerged with the cruel precision of a surgeon's blade. Her mother and mine were first cousins, making us second cousins ourselves. The news rippled through our families like a stone thrown into still water, creating waves of discord that divided our loved ones into opposing camps. Battle lines were drawn between those who supported our union and those who condemned it with righteous indignation. But we were young, our hearts burning with the fierce determination of first love, and we were resolved to write our own story, regardless of the whispers that followed us like persistent shadows. For 12 years, we built a life that defied convention, our home filled with the kind of love that doesn't fit into neat societal boxes. Our twin daughters grew up surrounded by laughter and acceptance, learning that family is defined by the depth of connection rather than the branches of a family tree. But time, that relentless sculptor of relationships, slowly began to reshape us. Like continents drifting across an endless ocean, we found ourselves moving in different directions, the space between us growing wider with each passing season. When the divorce finally came, it was as unconventional as our marriage had been. Instead of bitter battles and scorched earth, we chose to transform our love into something new. I channeled my entrepreneurial spirit into starting a business, bought her a house near mine, and we continued to co-parent with a love that had evolved rather than expired. Today, our daughters have grown into remarkable adults who love us both equally, and while the romantic chapter of our story has closed, we remain bound by something far stronger than legal documents or societal expectations. We're family, in all its complex, beautiful, and sometimes uncomfortable truth. Story 8. You've heard those horrifying stories about infant abuse, the ones that make your blood run cold and your soul recoil in horror, the kind that make you question not just humanity, but the very fabric of existence itself. I was that infant, and my father was the monster who stalked through the darkened corridors of my earliest memories, his shadow looming larger than life itself. But the true horror, the poison that would seep through the years and taint every relationship I would ever have, wasn't just in his actions. It was in my mother's calculated indifference, her willful blindness to the atrocities happening under her roof, as if closing her eyes could somehow make the nightmare disappear. The abuse wasn't an isolated incident, but a dark thread woven through the tapestry of my childhood, each moment of terror adding another stitch to this grotesque masterpiece of pain. My mother's role in this nightmare was perhaps even more chilling than my father's direct actions, a silent spectator to her child's suffering. There were times when she would walk in, witness the unspeakable, and simply turn away, her footsteps fading down the hall like hope disappearing into darkness, each step a betrayal that echoed through the empty chambers of my heart. My acting out, a desperate cry for help wrapped in the guise of rebellion, led to therapy sessions with a family friend. But even this potential lifeline became another link in the chain of betrayal that seemed to wrap tighter around my childhood with each passing year. When I finally found the courage to tell him the truth, to let the poison of my secret spill from my lips like black ink, he confronted my father and offered to report it to the police. But then he explained the potential consequences, painting a picture of a future that seemed even more terrifying than my present hell, and I chose silence, allowing the abuse to continue its relentless march through the remaining years of my childhood. The assaults only ceased when I was 11, after I finally found the voice that had been strangled by fear for so long, telling my father it didn't feel right. Though he would occasionally attempt to resume his violations during drunken episodes in my teenage years, sometimes even offering hollow apologies that rang as empty as church bells in an abandoned town, nothing truly changed until I became a father myself. The birth of my son became my moment of reckoning, a mirror held up to my own childhood that reflected back truths too painful to ignore. Looking into his innocent face, untouched by the shadows that had haunted my own early years, I knew I had to sever all ties with my parents to protect him from the darkness that had consumed my own childhood. When I confronted my mother, she looked me in the eye and, for the first and only time, said she loved me, only to follow it with a devastating denial of my truth and a command to never return, her words falling like the final nails in the coffin of our relationship. That was 5 years ago. Today, I've built a life I never dared dream possible. A loving wife who understands the depth of my scars, a perfect son who reminds me daily of the innocence I lost, and a stability that once seemed as unreachable as the stars themselves. My father, a respected doctor whose white coat hid the darkness within, escaped accountability for his crimes. I later learned he had also abused his own brother, and I live with the haunting knowledge of the vulnerable patients he treated over the years, each one a potential victim of the monster wearing a healer's mask. The scars of abuse run deeper than any physical wound could reach. I battle PTSD and violent nightmares that turn my sleep into a battlefield, and doctors tell me the early trauma likely stunted my amygdala development, leaving me prone to uncontrollable rage and anxiety that surge through me like toxic waves. But I've worked relentlessly to manage these demons, building a good life despite their constant whispers, a home of my own that feels safe, a solid career that gives me purpose, good credit that represents stability, and most precious of all, a family that loves me unconditionally, accepting both my strength and my brokenness. There are moments when I yearn for parents to share in my triumphs or offer guidance, the kind of normal family relationship that seems so simple in movies and television shows. But I've come to realize they wanted me to fail, to ensure no one would believe my truth, to keep their perfect facade intact while I crumbled in the shadows. So to my parents, I say this. Despite your best efforts to break me, to silence my voice and dim my light, I'm thriving without you, building a legacy of love and protection that stands in stark contrast to the inheritance of pain you tried to leave me. Story 9. I grew up in Maryland, where the rolling hills and winding back roads would become the backdrop for a moment that would haunt my conscience like a restless ghost, its cold fingers forever brushing against the edges of my memory. At 16, we were living in that precarious space between childhood and adulthood, testing boundaries with the reckless abandon of those who believe themselves immortal. That fateful night, we were typical teenagers driving home from a party, alcohol coursing through our veins like liquid courage, sticking to the shadowy back roads to avoid the watchful eyes of law enforcement. That's when fate threw us a cruel curve. An overturned Jeep appeared in our headlights like a twisted sculpture of metal and glass, a grotesque monument to the fragility of human life. We pulled over, our intoxicated minds struggling to process the horror unfolding before us like a macabre theater production. The driver had already surrendered to death's embrace, their body crushed beyond recognition in the mangled metal cocoon that had once been their vehicle. But the passenger, God, the passenger was still alive, each labored breath a desperate plea for help that echoed through the still night air like a prayer. One of my friends, operating on pure adrenaline that seemed to momentarily burn away the alcohol's fog, managed to pull them from the wreckage. We watched, helpless and terrified, as life slowly ebbed from their body, their final breath disappearing into the cold night air like a whisper lost to the wind. Panic seized us then, wrapping around our teenage minds like a suffocating blanket, our thoughts paralyzed by the crushing weight of potential consequences. None of us wanted to face the police, to admit we were drunk, to have our futures derailed by one terrible night of poor decisions. After a heated argument that seemed to last both seconds and eternities, each moment stretching like taffy in our alcohol-addled perception, we made a decision that would shadow us forever. We left, our taillights cutting through the darkness like the retreating footsteps of cowards. Later, the truth emerged like a knife to the heart, twisting deeper with each new detail. The victims were the parents of a girl in my class, their lives cut short on a night when help had been so close yet so far. For the remainder of high school, I carried this knowledge like a burning coal in my chest, its heat never diminishing, its weight never lightening. Every time I saw her in the hallways, every time I heard her name whispered in conversations, I wondered if we could have changed the outcome if we'd acted differently, if we'd been brave enough to face the consequences of our actions instead of fleeing into the night. The guilt and regret still linger, constant companions that whisper what-ifs in the dark hours of night when sleep eludes me and memories surface like bodies in a lake. Could we have saved at least one life if we'd called for help sooner? Would things have been different if we hadn't been so afraid of ruining our own futures that we abandoned others to their fate? These questions haunt me still, echoing through the chambers of my conscience like ghostly footsteps in an empty house. Story 10. My ex-husband was a study in calculated cruelty, a master artist painting in shades of pain and terror, his violence as precise as a surgeon's scalpel and as devastating as a natural disaster. During our 6 years together, years that felt like centuries trapped in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake, he brought me to death's door multiple times through strangulation, his hands around my throat becoming as familiar as a lover's caress, each squeeze a perverse intimacy that blurred the lines between love and hate, life and death. He violated me repeatedly, and in one particularly horrific incident, left me naked, unconscious, and bleeding on our garage's cold concrete floor. Also, he could go fishing, as if my broken body was nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle between him and his leisure time. It was our 2-year-old daughter who found me, her innocent hands patting my face with the gentle persistence of childhood, each touch a lifeline pulling me back to a consciousness I wasn't sure I wanted to reclaim. The memory of her frightened eyes still haunts my dreams, a reminder of how violence ripples outward to touch even the most innocent among us. One night, his fury manifested in a punch so powerful it drove my tooth through my lip, leaving it hanging by a thread of flesh like a broken door on its hinges. As he slept peacefully afterward, the monster temporarily dormant, I sat in the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror, methodically cleaning away the evidence of his rage. each dab of the cloth revealing another layer of the horror story written on my skin. The anger that consumed me in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. A white-hot fury that seemed to burn away the fog of fear and submission that had become my constant companion. In a small act of defiance, perhaps my first real rebellion against his tyranny, I grabbed his toothbrush, my hands trembling with a mixture of fear and vindictive pleasure. I used it to scrub the toilet bowl, paying special attention to the crusty urine stains and skid marks that marked its surface, watching with grim satisfaction as the pristine bristles turned brown with filth. I rinsed it just enough to hide my rebellion, returned it to its cup like nothing had happened, and went to bed with the first genuine smile I'd worn in months. I barely slept that night, my heart racing with a combination of fear and anticipation, waiting for his morning routine to begin like a child on Christmas morning. Except my gift would be revenge served with minty freshness. When his alarm sounded, I watched through half-closed eyes as he stumbled into the bathroom, took his morning bong hit, and brushed his teeth with my secret weapon. Before leaving, he tried to give me a goodbye kiss, but I feigned sleep, silently hoping he could taste his own filth all day, carrying a piece of my revenge with him wherever he went. That small victory, that tiny moment of revenge, became one of the few satisfying moments in those dark years, a secret flame I could warm myself by when the cold reality of my situation threatened to overwhelm me. 3.5 years ago, I finally found the strength to flee with our 2 beautiful children, transforming that small spark of defiance into a bonfire of liberation. Though he continues to stalk and harass us, like a shadow that refuses to fade in the light, we are together, safer and happier than we ever could have been under his reign of terror. We're rebuilding our lives brick by brick, each day another step away from the darkness he tried to trap us in, and I am proud to say we are thriving despite everything he put us through. Sometimes the smallest acts of defiance, even something as seemingly petty as a contaminated toothbrush, can be the first steps toward freedom. Tiny rebellions that remind us we're still alive, still fighting, still capable of reclaiming our power from those who try to steal it. Story 11. When I was 7 or 8, that delicate age when the world still seems painted in simple strokes of black and white, I committed an act of cruelty that has haunted me for decades, its shadow lengthening across the years like a sundial marking time with shame. My best friend's mother had recently lost her battle with cancer, a kind soul who had brightened our school with her volunteer work, her presence like sunshine streaming through classroom windows, whose absence was marked by a somber assembly in the classes she had touched, leaving an emptiness that seemed to echo through the hallways. One day during recess, beneath the watchful eyes of autumn clouds, anger clouded my young mind like a sudden storm, transforming the playground into a battlefield of emotions. For reasons that have long since dissolved in the mists of time, I wanted to hurt my friend, to make them feel pain as sharp and immediate as my momentary rage. What came out of my mouth was a weapon more precise and devastating than any physical blow, words that cut through the air like a poisoned arrow. At least I have a mom. I don't remember their immediate reaction. Perhaps my mind has mercifully drawn a veil over that moment, protecting me from the full weight of the pain I caused. The memory exists in fragments. The sudden silence that followed my words, the way the playground seemed to freeze in that instant, as if even the wind held its breath in shock. We remained friends for years afterward, our relationship bending but not breaking under the weight of that moment, naturally drifting apart in high school like leaves carried by different currents. But that moment has stayed with me, a dark stain on my conscience that no amount of time or regret can wash away. Fast forward nearly 2 decades, and fate wove an unexpected thread through the tapestry of our lives. That same friend married my closest friend, bringing our paths back together in a way I never could have anticipated. At their wedding, I felt like an imposter in a play I hadn't rehearsed for, my presence tainted by the ghost of those cruel words spoken so long ago, their echo still reverberating through the years. I don't know if they remember that moment, if it lives in their memory as vividly as it does in mine, but my friend's spouse never speaks about their mother, refusing to engage with any topic related to her memory, as if the very mention of her name might unravel something carefully held together. Sometimes I wonder, in those quiet moments when the past creeps up like shadows at dusk, if my thoughtless words contributed to that silence, if I helped build the walls around their grief, adding bricks to a fortress of pain that was never meant to be there. It's a burden I carry silently, like a stone in my pocket that grows heavier with each passing year, a constant reminder of how carelessly spoken words can inflict wounds that never fully heal, leaving scars that reshape the landscape of someone's heart forever. Story 12. I orchestrated a deception that spanned 3 years of my life, a carefully constructed facade that began with dropping out of university halfway through my first year. Instead of confessing my academic failure, I chose to weave an elaborate fiction, spinning a web of lies so intricate that sometimes even I lost track of its patterns, sharing my plans only with my closest confidants who became unwitting guardians of my secret. Rather than returning home in defeat, my shoulders heavy with the weight of failed expectations, I embarked on what I claimed was a journey across Europe, a grand adventure that existed only in my carefully crafted stories. In reality, I was funding my fictional travels through a patchwork of part-time jobs, each paycheck another thread in the tapestry of my deception.